Welcome everybody to today's webinar, How Some Law Departments Are Winning Law Firm Rate Negotiations. Today's program is produced by Above the Law and presented by PERSUIT, a company that provides a platform for corporate legal departments to manage outside counsel and legal spend. I'm Bob Ambrogi. I'm going to be serving as the moderator today. I'm a writer for Above the Law and write about legal tech at my own blog, Law Sites as well. And today we're going to be talking about some data findings and takeaways from PERSUIT's recently published Global Outside Counsel Rate Trends Report, which reveals some surprising insights about that legal departments should be aware of before launching into their next round of rate negotiations with their outside firms. And we have two people who are highly experienced and have a high degree of expertise in this area to share their takeaways and their interpretations of this data. And so before we go any further into the program, why don't we just take a moment? So the speakers today are Maui Guevero. Maui, why don't you start by introducing yourself? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Thanks, Bob. So my name is Maui Guevero. I am the Director of Legal Advisory at PERSUIT. The legal advisory team is essentially a team of subject matter experts that sit down and advise corporate legal departments every single day about how to optimize their outside counsel relationships. By way of background, I came from the law firm side of things. I was on a pricing team at Latham & Watkins, and then before that, I was at Goldman as an analyst. So happy to be here and really excited to talk about the data today.
Great. Well, look forward to hearing more from you. And also with us today is Ken Callander. Ken, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Bob. I'm the founder of Value Strategies. I actually started out long ago at Hewlett-Packard, was there for almost 30 years in operations and professional services. Then I went over to the law firm side, and I was the CMO at Davis Wright Tremaine for almost 8 years. And then I left Davis Wright and went in-house at Uber as the head of legal operations and chief of staff to the general counsel at Uber. And it was there that I started playing around with value-based fee arrangements that we had used at HP decades before, and moving Uber almost completely off of hourly rates was our goal. And I was at Uber for about 3 years, and then started Value Strategies, basically taking the ideas that I spearheaded at Uber and now working with companies, helping them better manage their outside counsel spend and get them off hourly rates onto value-based fee arrangements.
All right, well, welcome, Ken. So just what we're going to talk about today, before we dive into it, we're going to be kind of giving you an overview of the pricing landscape and what the data shows about that. Some, I think, surprising information about how discounts in pricing are no longer the lever they might once have been, and then provide some holistic strategies for legal departments to pursue in their pricing negotiations. And before we actually get into all of this, we thought we'd start with a quick poll. So if we can put that poll up, and the poll is to ask you what rate increases have you received or are you expecting from your outside counsel in 2026? And we can give you just a couple of moments to do that. And then Maui, maybe we can kind of turn it over to you as we're waiting for those results to come in.
Great. I'm super interested to hear the results that are actually going to come in and how they measure up to what we have been seeing in the market today. So essentially, just to summarize top level numbers, it's double-digit increases globally. When we look specifically in the US, we are essentially seeing an average of a 12% year-over-year increase on rates. Now, the big thing that we really uncovered as we were looking even historically at these numbers is that this is no longer an outlier. I think after the pandemic, there was a little bit of volatility in terms of the rate behavior from law firms. Initially, when the world shut down, there was a lot of ability to absorb some of this increases, or not absorb, but firms were more willing to essentially say, okay, we'll keep it flat or we'll do a modest increase. But after that, when transactional work spiked, it normalized, that really started this kind of aggressive posture of rate increases on the law firm end. And now what we are starting to see is that it's becoming a pattern that is holding. So it's no longer, one outlier year where there were significantly high rate increases. It's essentially the new normal. And from my perspective, what it's done is it's re-anchored the entire market to this level and this expectation. So there is now this thinking that we should be anticipating high increases. The new normal for partner rates is $2,000 and up, and it's re-anchoring this perspective for a lot of legal departments out there, where this is what they're now expecting. And interestingly enough, I just got some of the poll responses here, and majority of the audience members, about 35%, are seeing 5 to 10%, but a significant portion, 29%, are seeing 10 to 15% increases. And the interesting thing to me is, if you look at the smallest batch, the 0 to 5, that's 14, but the 15% and up higher increases is 16. So definitely skewing towards these high double-digit increases for many companies, and the data here in the poll just reflects what we're seeing in the market today. Interested to hear your thoughts on that, Ken.
Yeah, when I first saw these numbers, this is incredible. Anecdotally, I hear this from all my clients. We're getting 12%, 15% increases, and it's like, okay, is that an outlier or not? So the fact that you guys got these numbers that show that this is what's happening across the board doesn't surprise me, because I hear it from all my clients. I can tell you though, I just work on corporate legal departments, and I talk to them all day long. They are noticing this, okay? These big increases, and it's driving them crazy. The fact that, it used to be inflation based, maybe a little bit over inflation and all that, like you said, a few years ago, but now, the 10, 15% increases just seems to be the standard increase. And it's like, where does this stop? We're already hitting $3,000 an hour with some firms in New York. And where does that end? Where do we go? $5,000, $10,000 an hour? And when you have a 10 or 15% increase on a $3,000 base, those numbers go up exponentially, right? So we're going to start hitting, those, big numbers, even bigger numbers, very fast. And so my clients are just saying, where does this end? And that's, I think we're going to start talking about this, Maui, is like, there are alternatives to this, to dealing with these types of rate increases. And what's driving this, really, there's a number of things, and I think you've touched on some of it, but the firms compete against each other, especially in the top, the AmLaw 100, and they all look at each other in terms of, PPP, profits per partner, and profits per equity partner, and it's sort of not only bragging rights, in terms of when the AmLaw ratings come out, who's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but it's also used for marketing for them, for trying to entice laterals and high-end associates to come join their firm, right? And also bragging rights, out there, not only in the legal industry, but with their clients as well. So, and so they're all trying to keep up with each other, and it's become this big race. And I think a lot of that's driving this. And also, their costs are going up. Yes, inflation's driving their costs up, but I think you've also mentioned, Maui, that there's other things that are dealing with both AI adoption, other technologies that are pushing that too. But, most of my clients will tell you that doesn't, validate or give good reason as to why you're seeing these types of increases, and not a few points over inflation.
Yeah, 100%. And I do want to make sure that we touch on that aspect. I think it's important for any legal operations or legal department to understand the law firm side of things and how they're perceiving and viewing this market, why they're making these decisions when you go into these conversations on the firm side. I think there's a couple things that we brought up that I think are super valuable. One, that aspect of competition, right? Particularly, you see in our data that AmLaw, kind of that second cohort of the AmLaw, past the AmLaw 10 towards that middle cohort, there are some of the firms that are the most aggressive in increasing their rates. And that's because they're playing a little bit of catch up. They saw the signal, the market signal essentially, that the realization for these firms, right? So how much they're actually able to bill versus the rate increase stayed at around 80 to 90%. There was no reduction. Even when they were increasing rates aggressively, clients were still willing to pay those rates. And the firms that are not increasing are just going to get left further and further behind. If you think about it, if you're running a law firm and you only increase rates 5% this year, everybody else 20%, you're now that much further back than everybody else next year. The baseline that you're starting your rates from are much lower. And so everybody is trying to play catch up with these new ceilings that are being set. That's one aspect. Another aspect is you're exactly right. I think AI pressures in the long term, there's this talk about it's going to erode the billable hour. I do believe that it will be the thing that supplants the billable hour in the long run. But in the short run, the strongest lever for law firms to counteract a reduction in hours is the other side of that formula, the hourly rate. So if demand is anticipated to go down, whether that's the firms are getting more efficient at providing the supply side, or the demand side comes down because in-house folks are also using AI and they're going out less, you have to make up for that somewhere. And in the near term, the most effective lever that law firms have is going to be hourly rates. And so that's also a component of what we're seeing, right? If we looked at our data, what we're seeing is partners are increasing the most aggressively. Of course, they're the experts, they're the niche, they're what you're actually going to pay for. And then the associate banding, what's happening there is it's tightening. So what I mean by that is the gap between a first year and an eighth year used to be pretty significant, and now that's shrinking over time. And I think that is an exact response to this idea or this thought that there's going to be some erosion on that lower end of the banding. And so if that erosion is happening, you need to normalize all your associates around this kind of centralized rate that is a lot tighter. So, that's definitely an aspect to think about when you're talking to these firms and negotiating with them.
Yeah, and you're totally right, Maui. And I also, you were in a law firm, I was in a law firm, understanding basic law firm economics. There was the basic, the ruler, rates, utilization, leverage, expenses, and realization, right? So when you think about utilization, how many hours, do they bill against their quota that they've got? Leverage is associate partner ratios, right? Expenses is just that. Expenses and realization you talked about is, what do they actually collect after every, dollar that they bill? The only, when you think about profitability and revenue in a law firm, the only thing a lot of those things are baked in. Their expenses are what they are, their leverage is what they've set up, their utilization is usually pretty close to, the high end of the board. They can only, get up to 100%. It's rates is what drives their profitability. And so that's their only lever that they've got to do that in just a very basic form. And that's what they're doing here. And that's how they're driving up their profitability and their revenue, because that's the only lever they really have to pull.
Exactly. And again, like going back to the other side of the market, right? Up to this point, the signals have been go, go, go. I don't think firms have received just market-wide pushback on these rates or significant attrition in their realization. If there's nothing signaling them, they're not going to change the behavior because it works. Any logical business person that runs a business like this, if you see a methodology, an approach, a philosophy that works, why would you ever deviate from that? So there are things always that kind of threaten and loom over the industry. But economically, if you look at how the metrics have been, Kirkland Ellis just released some of their profitability metrics today. They hit 10 billion in revenue. It was a 20% increase from last year, right? That's not a significant, a component of it, I'm sure, is like significant more deal work, more PE work. But a big factor of that is the rate increases that they probably issued last year. They were probably in the double digits. And right. So, again, if it's working for them, I don't blame them for not changing it. That's a great strategy to use.
The noise level, I can tell you, the client side. The noise level, the complaint level from the client side is really gone up in the last couple of years, especially this last year. And I'm starting to hear it more and more from clients. So.
But is there that tipping point? How far can you push it before legal departments begin to push back against this?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Did the rates have to hit 5,000, like I said, or $10,000 an hour? Um, I, it really varies by client. I have some clients that just print money, and so they just, it doesn't matter so much to them. And I have other clients that are just held to very tight budgets, and this is
Mhm.
really, really important. And they're trying to figure ways, and I think, we're going to talk about that in a minute about other ways to get around this, right? But
Yeah.
and so they really do notice it, and they feel the pain because they have budgets to hit, and their budgets are being cut, right? And everyone's running leaner and do more with less sort of input, and it's getting tough for them. And so they're pushing back, and so that's why I'm saying the noise level is going up. So I think at some point something's going to break.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I think, the breaking point for me is more so what are going to be the economic factors and kind of the structural factors that actually allow that to happen. There's a couple things I think that's keeping it on the law firm side, right? Their pipes, their bones, their skeleton is built off of the hourly rate model. That's how they measure profitability. That's how they measure performance, utilization. You just talked about that, Ken. They have requirements of how many hours they bill every single year or how many hours that they have to work every single year. And so until that changes, fundamentally, they're tied to the hourly rate. Like even if they're pitching
Maui, their
exactly.
comp model.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's a factor. And so what I think has to happen is there has to be an alternative that makes sense to law firms as well, right? Like if we are going to go value-based billing, if we are going to go fixed fee, we have to be able to measure, report, be compensated according to that. I like to tell an anecdote of my time at Latham of a partner who was underutilization. So they didn't like maximize utilization, but they were above their realization rate. So they were actually getting a premium for every hour because they ran off really effective AFAs. And they still kind of got a slap on the wrist for like, why aren't you working maximum hours? But they were one of the most profitable partners in the business. So there's this kind of perverse incentive almost that happens because the pipes are built off the hourly rate. So I think that alternative has to exist on the firm side. Yeah.
And I give the anecdote about the partner that gets paid $1,000 an hour and in a 30-minute phone call saves a client $10 million. What do they get paid for? 500 bucks, right? So from the law firm side too, they are not getting the value that oftentimes they deliver to their clients.
100%. Yeah. And then I think on the client side, right, it's not all on the firm side. Hourly rates are easy. You don't have to think about it. you know that if you work this many hours, this is what you're going to get charged on. You don't have to scope it. You don't have to be too connected. I think that's why it's so pervasive and it's so hard to surmount, is because it is very easy. Like fundamentally, this is the easiest way to understand how you can value a piece of work. How much did they put into it? How much effort did they put into it? Value is a lot more subjective, and historically, there hasn't really been a good way to measure or even market test what that value has been. We're going to talk about it later on of how other clients are doing that now, but historically, that's one of the reasons why hourly rates still persist and we still operate off of it. Again, it's the alternative. So to me, that's really the breaking point. How do we get to that point where there are alternatives that are valid, widespread, accepted? Today I still have clients ask me, is it a good idea to shadow bill my fixed fees? And I'm so against it. I'm like, no, you gave your firm an opportunity to be efficient. Why are you now policing that efficiency? And then, you've asked them to share this risk, and then you get to the end and you're asking now them to take full on risk. And so, there's aspects like that on both sides that I think need to change.
Totally agree. And also understand that, I know we have to move on, but that hours are not tied to value, right? It can take one attorney 10 hours to do something, another attorney 5 hours to do the same thing. Hours don't equal, and you really got to be thinking about the value of the deliverable that they're delivering, and not how many hours does it take to do it, right? So totally agree.
Yeah. So the next piece of this I do want to talk about is really kind of this management of rates and how historically it's been done. and that's historically been done with rate discounts. So an interesting thing here that we saw in our data is it's also actually even reflected, if you look at it outside of just PERSUIT, is a normalization in the discounts. I hear this all the time from clients. I've got a great discount. I've got 15% off. I've got a great discount. I've got 20% off. When we look at the actual data across the clients, that is the normal. Firms aim and target, their stretch goal is 90% realization. Their realistic goal is between 80 to 90%. They know that when they go out to market, that there's going to be some attrition, some write-downs, some pushbacks on the rates, and discounts that they're going to have to give up front, and it always normalizes around 10 to 15%. So what does that mean for you? If your discount essentially never increases every single year, you're still absorbing the entirety of that rate increase. Like achieving a 15% discount consistently every single year actually does nothing to control that rate cost or that rate increase. It's almost like a paper win to essentially say like, oh, we got to keep the 15% discount that we've got. You have to be a lot deeper and a lot more purposeful around conversations with discounts. And Ken, I don't know about your experience, but from my side, firms fight tooth and nail on these discounts. They fight these hard, and ultimately what happens is you arrive at this normalized percentage.
Yeah, and I tell my clients all the time, and it's interesting to have the data that backs it up now, that 15% is sort of like the standard. That's just table stakes for most firms, but they do fight tooth and nail, when you try and push them to a higher discount, and that drives, because it drives their realization, right? And that's, realization has been running between 80 and 85%, pretty much standard for the last 5, 6 years, 7 years, and that hasn't changed. But the discounts now, like you said, is standard. I think, did we have another poll that we wanted to run here?
Yeah, we've got a poll here we can put up with the question. The question in the poll is, what tools or data sources do you use to benchmark outside counsel rates and matches? That should be up now, and we'll report back to you in a few moments after we hear your answers on that.
Yeah. So while we're doing that, I would just say, I often tell people when you said Maui, I get 15% discount or I get 20% discount, but yeah, my common response is 15% off infinity is still infinity, right?
Yeah.
Because
exactly.
Because it doesn't give you any predictability. It doesn't stop the firm from throwing more associates on a matter or billing more hours. So people just think they're getting a better deal because they're getting that discount, but it doesn't drive. And there's a huge value, especially to a lot of the clients I work with, there's a huge value in predictability. And I have some clients that actually pay more for a predictable fee than a lower cost on hourly rates when they don't know when it's just an open PO, right? So, that predictability, especially when the CLOs and the GCs are being held to a budget now, that predictability can mean their job, right? If they can't hit their budgets. So that's why it's super important to them. I guess we have some poll results coming in here.
Yeah, we do. And I want to talk about one of the questions in here as well. We've got somebody who essentially was asked by their procurement team point blank why are law firms allowed annual rate increases in the first place? And why can't we just freeze rates, or increase them? That's actually a very good question. And what I would say is that clients who I've seen some very innovative clients ask this question in a way that actually challenges how the law firm is going to respond, right? Because I think if you just ask it straight out, like, why should we even give you a rate increase in the first place? There's a lot of things that they can pull to, client demand, industry demand. There's a very in-demand partner. We are trying to compete within this market, the prestige item, cost inflation, talent wars, like all of those things come from the perspective of what matters to a law firm operating a business. Clients that have conversations that get somewhere are the ones that ask a different question. What increase in value justifies the increase in rates that you're showing me right now, right? And that I've seen that conversation lead to very interesting
Oh yeah.
discussions between relationship partners of like, oh, wait a second. I have to now justify why I am worth 15% more this year than I am last year. What value am I bringing to you, client, additionally on top and layered on that? I think that has to be the shift in what these conversations occur. And firms should be able to justify that. Like genuinely, firms should be able to show you success rate criterias on the deals that they work with you on, success rate on the litigation that they work with you on, an ability to client service, right? To have that service. Like they say all the time, we're outside counsel, we're your relationship partners. I think that relationship piece has been missing. And whenever rate negotiations come through, we get really, really stuck in those numbers. So I agree. I actually necessarily don't think that fundamentally there's anything that justifies double-digit increases on an annual basis on rates. Inflationary increase, cost increases, sure, we can tie back to that, but that's not what you, client, should care about. Now, you, client, should care about the additional value per percentage increase that you're actually getting from your firms. And that's where the conversation should lie, because that's going to let your attorneys decide internally. One of the other things that's in the rate report we had was this idea of downshifting in the market. Not every matter has to go to the most expensive firm. So versus discounts, you actually just go down to a lower rate tier. But you can't do that if you don't understand your firm's capabilities, where their value lies, and also what is really underlying that rate increase.
And I think, yeah, and you made a good point about, what extra value, and that I have clients, bigger clients, that will ask the firms, over and above the inflation adjustment, what, for that 10% more, am I getting 10% better quality? Am I getting 10% better realization? Response times? What am I getting for that 10% extra over and above? And, my clients will push back and say, I can't increase the price of my product by 10 or 15% every year. Customers wouldn't pay for it, and, they wouldn't allow it. And yet you're doing this to me, and I can't pass those through. So how am I supposed to deal with that? And then in terms of the question about freezing rates, yeah, I have clients that do freeze rates with their bigger firms. If you have enough leverage with a firm because you're a big client, you can do that. And firms will squawk, but they don't want to lose the business. And so they do down the road, you'll unfreeze them and they're going to try and make it back up again. But that is a tactic that some clients use, but you have to have enough leverage to be able to do that. And I think there's another question in here too, about discounts on our discounts.
Building in the discount, setting up the rate. Yeah. That happens, right? Like I said, the law firms are smart. They've had positive revenue growth since the Great Recession. Like there hasn't been a down year essentially for if you look at the market as a whole, they've essentially grown or either stayed flat, and that flat was during the volatility during the pandemic. And so they're really, really good at running their businesses. And because they're really, really good at running their businesses, a component of that is understanding that when they go out to market, they will have to write time off. They will have to fight some, like the modern flood of e-billing, AI-enabled matters and following business rules and all these things. It's always an arms race. The clients will develop something to challenge the hourly model. The firms will respond in kind so that they can maintain kind of the dominance within that marketplace. And so, yeah, even if you look at it more fundamentally, right, a transactional attorney, even at the same firm, same years of experience, oftentimes is much more expensive than an employment litigation attorney. They're going to charge a premium higher rate. That's, I think, just understood in the market. So that, when we say do they bake in the discount already? I think they bake in a premium. So they always come in with a perspective of, if I can get 0% discount, that's great. So I'm going to bake in a premium on the timekeepers who I think is going to demand that rate in the market.
Another thing I would just add is on volume discounts. A lot of firms offer these volume discounts that, you get 3% at 1 million and 10% or 5% at 2 million, et cetera, et cetera. What I would suggest to clients out there is that if you hit a certain benchmark every year, and you're supposed to be getting 10% at $5 million and you're constantly getting 5 million, go back to the firm and say, we want that 10% from $0. That's an old trick that the firms use by having the tier discounts where you only get the discount. And when you hit the 10 million, you're going to get the 10%. No, I would always go back to the firm and say, we constantly give you, the 5 million or the $10 million mark. We want that discount from $0. And usually firms are going to agree to that because the logic just makes total sense.
Yeah. And we've talked about a couple of these things already of why rate management really is becoming less and less effective, or even if it is, it should not be your primary means of controlling costs in your legal department, right? Some of these things that we talked about is rate increases, again, single most effective levers for law firms to control their profitability and revenue almost every single year. Two, this is another point, right, that we chatted about, is the compounding issue. It's now 12% over rates that are $2,000. Associates are approaching $2,000. In the AmLaw 10, you can't find an associate under $1,000. Like, these are the normalized factors of what the market is today. So if you are really just controlling it off of discounts, well, the increase is now off $1,000 this year. It's going to be off $1,200 next year. Pretty soon it's going to be off $2,000. So if the model continues, you're never going to be able to catch up. We looked at our own data on this, and over the course of 4 years, the baseline jump from the rates we were seeing that then to now is 36%. So it went from $1,000 to $1,300, $1,360. That's a massive jump in costs during that time, and so it really is challenging to think about it that way. And I know we also got a question around this third point, and Ken, I'm super interested to hear your thoughts on this around the shadow billing, this efficiency kind of paradox with hourly rates, where the most money the firm is going to make is when they have the most hours that they can bill to, right? And so they're always incentivized to maximize the hours on any matters that they work. Now, that's not to say that they do this, as sort of an maliciously. They're not just charging hours, billing hours to charge it up, but it still remains an economic factor, an economic force, that if there's nothing to control those hourly rates, they're going to operate with like full bore maximum impact. They're not thinking about the efficiency component.
Well, of course.
This is one of actually.
Yeah,
exactly.
Just to follow up that, Maui. Yeah, of course, because the hourly rates, and everybody will agree to this, hourly rates don't incentivize firms to be efficient, right? Because they get paid based on the number of hours they bill. So they actually are being incentivized to not be efficient. Not that they don't want to be efficient, but it's a reverse incentive for them. So and that's why we're going to talk more here in a minute about value-based fee arrangements and getting off of hourly rates, because that's really going to change that paradigm.
Yeah, but I think to be able to do that successfully, both sides of the market have to be willing to partner and share some of that risk. If you think about, one of the most old school pricing arrangements, fee cap, essentially, right? So a do not exceed number. You're still not really incentivizing the firm to be efficient, because the best they can do is get as close to the cap as possible without going over, right? So they're not, sharing a benefit. Yeah, exactly. They're not sharing a benefit with taking the outsized risk of going over that number. They're only going to be able to realize as good as the rate discount that they're giving you currently. But in a fixed fee situation, the more efficient they are, the better they run their matter, the better they actually apply their expertise, right? That example you said of if they have a motion to dismiss fixed fee at 100K, and it only takes them 10 hours to do it, I think they fully deserve that 100K if the risk is relative, right? If this was going to be a multi-million-dollar liability or a multi-million-dollar damage case, and they fixed it then because they threw their best, legal mind at it, I should be happy as a client. I shouldn't sit there then and kind of dot my I's and cross my T's and say, oh, that only took you 30 minutes. I don't want to pay the 100K. Now that you actually did it right and did it efficiently and staffed me with like the A team, I want to just give you the 10 hours times what your hourly rate is. So I think that mentality also has to change. Like this aspect that someone has to win, it has to be a win-win situation. And for that to be able to happen, it has to be a shared risk between the client and the firm. And so
I have a client
yeah.
on the cap fees, Maui, that actually did a study and found that, of all their fees that were on capped rates, 85% of them always hit the cap. So, I mean, that just shows you that. So they actually looked at that. So, and cap fees, they're not, from the firm's perspective, they're not really that fair to firms, right? Because they're just paying hourly rates, and then when you hit the cap, it's all on them. The whole idea here is and I saw there was a question that zipped by. We're getting a lot of questions coming in, but about win-win situations and how do you really align and that's really important, thinking about aligning the incentives between the client and the firm, right? And I think that's important too.
Yeah, 100%. And then the other thing too that like hourly rates miss is the other components of value in that legal work, right? Risk, complexity, scope, staffing, efficiency, like all these other things that are not necessarily embedded in an agreement of hourly rates between a firm. Because again, you don't have to think about it. It's really simple. You apply an hourly rate, they work some hours, the formula is hours times rates. And you don't have to go to that additional layer. And so we have now a lot more sophisticated corporate legal departments that are thinking more deeply about it. Like, reallocation of work. Should this go to our AmLaw 100 firm? And I have some data to show. And again, these are some of the strategies that we're going to talk about. But, these other aspects become buried in rate negotiations, and they're super important. And I really do think that there is a better way to understand and measure and kind of operate in this environment where the value of the legal work is a lot more closely tied to the cost. Rates just don't have that strong of a connection to the value, in my view.
I think in the interest of time, we ought to move on to some of those ideas.
Let's do it.
As we're doing that, should we drop this last poll question in here involving cost control levers? And the question is, what are the primary cost control levers you are using to manage outside counsel costs? And while we wait for you to answer that, Maui, why don't you start talking about some of the strategies corporate legal departments can use?
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been talking about now for the last half an hour essentially is value-based billing and matter discipline, right? Essentially starting to introduce a concept of pricing beyond the billable hour. And one of the data points that's super interesting to me when we looked at the PERSUIT data, so we looked at historically over the last few years, since we have a big chunk of data, essentially 2021, what was the rate at which the hourly rates increased? And then what was the rate at which the fixed fee prices for that same work increased? And it was a 3x difference. So we hear this all the time. Oh, the fixed fees are just going to increase at the same rate as the hours. They're built off the hours. But they're not. They're actually completely, to a certain degree, they're divorced, right? Because those fixed fees, when you look at it from the law firm side, they optimize for profitability. They do modeling. They do analysis. They look at the leanest staffing to be able to make sure that they have a pretty healthy margin on those fixed fees. And because they do that, they're a lot more purposeful and thoughtful when they put those pitch proposals together versus the hourly rate. And that shows. There's also cost controls that happen, right? I think the expectation that fixed fees are going to go up 10% year over year versus the hourly rate, there isn't that relationship. I think clients today anticipate, like the earlier kind of question that we got, that hourly rates are just going to go up year over year. That hasn't hit the fixed fee market. I think a component of that is because it's a lot more competitive. That's another thing that we'll talk about. But really, super important to understand that the alternative way of doing this is possible. People are doing it. And it's just a matter really of upskilling and enabling your attorneys and your legal department to start leveraging these types of models. Almost every single firm in the world has an AFA structure arrangement with one of their clients, right? It's not a rarity anymore for this to happen. They have sophisticated pricing teams. It can work. And I think it really needs to start from the client side, because that's the strongest, one of the strongest levers that I've seen be impactful and effective for other corporate legal departments.
Yeah, and I would add to that people ask, well, how is this going to save money, and how is it going to be different? When you move to a fixed fee based on a scope of work, you're paying for the value of that deliverable and not the number of hours. And by having it on a fixed fee, it forces, as I mentioned before, we talked about before, the fact that hourly rates don't incentivize firms to be efficient. So that efficiency gain, when it's on a fixed fee, now it's on the firm's dime to be able to be more efficient in order to meet that fixed fee. So it forces the firm to be more efficient. And I think this gap that you're seeing between the hourly rates and the fixed fees, a lot of that is that efficiency gain, because the same work is being done, the same results are being had here, but you're getting the efficiency gain because that inefficiency that in the hourly rate is being transmitted into that. So I think that's an important point. And then people say, well, but fixed fees, they only work for certain types of work and all. Actually, that's not true. We have some clients have moved everything off of hourly rates to fixed fees and to the value-based fee arrangements. I have some very, very, very large clients that have moved all their litigation off hourly rates. So, people say, well, you can't do that with litigation. That's not true. Litigation is one of the biggest areas that we're now moving into value-based fee arrangements. And then you've got, a lot of your other types of areas, your advice and counsel work, whether it's corporate or employment, or IP, or privacy or regulatory. You can move those to monthly fixed fees based on the scope of work, right? And that's locked in now. You can lock it in for 3 years with a fixed fee. And the litigation is on a fixed fee by phase, as Maui talked about, for example, a fixed fee for motion to dismiss, right? So there are a lot of ways to do this and break it down where you can have all sorts of fee arrangements that work without having to go into the hourly model.
Yeah, and the other thing I want to mention is
should we just discuss real quick the poll results here that are in, because they're relevant right here. Yeah, just on that question of what levers you're using to control. We've got rate negotiations 26%, panels 9%, outside counsel guidelines 19%, invoice reviews 19%, AFAs 10%, competition RFPs 15%, and other 2%. So on the AFAs, just 10% there.
I got a lot of ways to go.
I'm not surprised. I mean, that's if you look at the billing data, I mean that holds, right? They all stay under 20%. I think a component of that is just unfamiliarity. A component of that too is, I think, long-standing and held beliefs around what AFAs used to be. So one, AFAs used to be a lot more high risk. This concept that Ken was talking about of, can this fit my super complex matter? It's so bespoke and all these niche, topics, and the fact pattern just doesn't fit an AFA. I think our data doesn't reflect that. When we look at billing data, for example, from our Apereo side, so that's our e-billing side, or our matter management side, 24% of matters that only had a budget or a fee estimate, they went over that budget fee estimate 24% of the time. Then you shift that over and you look at same matters that were either cap fees or fixed fees, and those only went over 6.7% of the time. So even just the fundamental aspect that, again, the partners at that law firm have to manage their matters to a number that you can hold them to, that creates an entirely new environment for them to operate in. They make decisions based off of that. And I think the other aspect too that a lot of people get stuck on is fixed fees seem to be very rigid. That's not the case anymore. There are things that you can do to shift the arrangement and evolve it over time. Like, I don't think the expectation anymore is you pitch the number to a client, or a firm pitches you a number at the beginning of a trial before you see even discovery, right? And then at the end of it, you either won or somebody lost. It's a lot more collaborative now. You break it up into phases. You break it up into key cost driving activities. you, the firm, and the client really understand what are the value drivers for this matter. And if something shifts, it's a lot easier to have a conversation as to how to adjust that fee. It's no longer, oh, it was a lot more contentious of a counterparty, and so it took us 300 hours. No, what drove that, right? Is that because our strategy was incorrect here? We didn't double down on negotiation or settlement. And so what did we value that at the beginning? What did we value our baseline set of assumptions in the beginning? Let's make an adjustment to the value based off of that base case scenario. It's becoming a lot more sophisticated. People have gotten a lot more experience in it, but you don't get that experience if you don't start. And so I think that's one of the biggest things is a lot of people feel like I have to be an expert in this before I dive in and jump in. And that's definitely not the case. It doesn't happen for that, even for I'm sure those big clients that Ken talked about, they didn't start at 100% AFA, but they did start AFAs. I think that is the key thing there.
And I think two things and we're going to talk about this in a little bit in a second, is competition is really important in this process. If you just go to a firm and say, we want to give you this matter, now how much is it going to cost? Give us a fixed fee. Oh, well, this is very complicated. This is going to be very expensive. Versus if you go to 3 firms and you say, here's the scope, here are the deliverables, here's the timeline, give me a fixed fee, and by the way, you're up against a couple of other firms. It's amazing how much sharper their pencils get right now because they want that work, and now they know that that's going to come in. And in terms of, before you even get to value-based fee arrangements, just having a matter intake process where you try to align the matter value with the value price point of the firm, and I think that's your next slide here, is really important, right? Because you don't even have to get to the fixed fees first. Just have a matter intake process where you look at the value of the matter and then you align it with what I call the value price point of the firm. And it's basically what is the average hourly rate of that firm, so that you're not giving all your mid-level matters to very expensive firms. Just by doing that and having an actual intake process in place that directs matters based on matter value to the right size firm will say, you can look at the numbers here that Maui's got of the savings that you're going to get off of something like that. It's amazing, just even before you get to fixed fees, value-based fee arrangements.
Yeah, and I want to talk about another interesting part of that poll that came up, right? If you look at the 2 second most and the third most utilized cost lever for in-house folks, it's outside counsel guidelines and invoice reviews. Those are both reactive. They happen once the matter's been arranged, once it's already done. You're looking at the bills now in front of you, and now you're just fighting tooth and nail to get those write-offs in, to get those write-downs on, catching the firms almost on, oh, you can't bill for that. That was in our OCGs. Oh, this was an early billing. That's 5% off. But the proactive ones like panel management, competition AFAs, they're the secondary. I really think that is the under-levered aspect for a lot of these teams, is the proactive rather than the reactive. Setting up a system that actually allows you to be successful from the beginning or even before the beginning of your matters occur. This is an example of what happens when you assign out work just to your biggest firms. And volume discounts we talked about before. I had a very interesting conversation with a client where they were like, oh no, I need to send this work there because I get a 2.5% off if I send this work to this firm because I'm going to hit my volume discount. And I'm looking at them and I'm like, okay, you get 2.5% discount if you send it to this, super large firm with high rates, or you could send it down your panel and get a firm that have, their baseline rates, even if they're just operating off rates, is 20% cheaper than this firm, and they're fully capable, right? It's super simple slip and fall work, and they're just sending it there because they want to hit a volume discount. And it looks like a win on their book when they hit a volume discount. I think there is this thinking that we need to be a lot more purposeful around how we actually allocate this work, and actually purposeful around how we set up our panels and that front end of the experience.
And, on panels, I get this question all the time. We have firms or clients want to do what they call a convergence, right? Where you've got 100 firms and we want to get it down to 15. to do all our work, and we're going to give the majority of our work to those 15 firms because we're getting a higher discount. We're back to that discount thing again. I often recommend that clients don't do that, because in order to, especially if you're a big worldwide company, in order to handle all types of matters across all jurisdictions, the only way to do that and get it to 15 firms is you've got to go with mostly the biggest firms in the world that have the geographic footprint to cover all those jurisdictions and the breadth of practice area experience. And then you're back to the most expensive firms in the world. So I look at it by practice area and region and break it down that way and build sub panels based on that, and don't go with the worldwide panels because you're just going to end up paying more. So,
yeah. What about on the right sourcing question? There was a question from the audience on the geographic disbursement of this. If a firm operates in multiple states and rates vary by state, should the corporate legal department be pushing a firm to send particular matters to particular states where the rates might be lower?
Yeah, potentially. Like, I think the deeper aspect there is you should be having these types of conversations with your firms, because you don't know what they're willing to do, right? Of course, a component of this is legal ops teams are being asked, and legal departments are being asked to do more with less. You just may not have the resourcing or may not have the capabilities. You can focus on your highest spend firms, or you can focus on the key strategic areas for your legal department. But at the very least, you should be having conversations like this. Like, not every client is going to be able to manage potentially, like multiple rate card structures with a single firm that's broken out by jurisdiction and broken out by practice area. So you might have to go with just a single prevailing rate card, but that doesn't preclude you from having conversations around, okay, what else can we do to then control this cost? Do you have, internal ALSP resources? Do you have AFA structures that you can offer, other value adds? The bigger thing is just to start challenging and actually having conversations beyond just the discount, and not spending and pouring your time just purely on, getting the maximum discount percentage every single year.
Yeah, and I would answer that your bigger firms are not, they have a sort of a standard rate card across all jurisdictions. And if you really want to get that jurisdictional difference, you're going to have to go to more local firms or the smaller regional or super regional firms to be able to get that. And that's what you should be doing anyway for lower valued matters.
Yeah. Exactly. And I think the last thing that I do want to talk about, because this is a big thing now in the world of modern AI, is how do you know it's the right price, right? Like, I think it's very easy. There's a lot of benchmarking. There's a lot of thinking around, or there's a lot of data at this point around hourly rates. It's very easy to kind of source this information. We have a good feeling and understanding about it. That's less so for AFAs. So I think competition and transparent competition is one of the key ways that these clients are able to do it successfully in these limited instances. Like Ken was saying, you don't just go to one firm. You shop this work out, you get a good understanding, hey, given this same scope, same assumption set, what are my bench of firms telling me the value of this work is? And then you negotiate from there. And over time, what you can do, like PERSUIT is a marketplace, you get this bolstering of data. You get to start to understand who is more expensive, who's less expensive. Do they match the requisite, risk tolerance that I have, or the expertise that I'm looking for? And that's how you start to understand the price of your matters. You start to understand, hey, they are 20% more expensive, but this is a bet the company, and there are factors and components that fit those partners really well. I'm willing to pay that 20% premium, even though the market is telling me this is the average price for it. But you don't get that if you don't go through this transparent, competitive process. And Ken, I don't know if you had like a similar experience too.
Yeah, and these numbers just validate what I already see with my clients, which is, we see savings in the 20 to 50% range, depending upon the jurisdiction, the type of matter, and the type of firm arrangement you currently have. When you move from whatever your current arrangement is to a competitive value-based structure, we see between 20 and 50%. The 40, 50% is more on the litigation side, and transactional side, M&A type stuff, and the lower end stuff might be more on patent prosecution and real estate leasing and that sort of thing. So, but the 20 to 50%, which fits right into the model that I see that you have here with your numbers. I think we have a few minutes. I think we get some questions, right?
to quickly mention, I do also have the QR code for the outside counsel rate trends report that we recently just published. If you want a little bit more detail, you really want to get digging into the numbers, feel free to scan that QR code or just visit our website. It's PERSUIT with a PERSUIT. I think honestly, the last big thing for me is really that this, what is AI going to do to pricing? In the short term, what we're seeing is it's not changing the law firm behavior on hourly rates. If anything, it's making them more aggressive and increasing the rates. When are clients actually going to start seeing discounts? When you start challenging and questioning your firms as to how that reflects onto your pricing structures. But that is unnatural to fit to an hourly model. Like, it is unnatural to say, okay, you're going to get more efficient. You should transfer all those efficiencies to me. The firms are just going to find ways to supplement those hours, right? Okay, great. They didn't spend 10 hours drafting the report, but they're going to spend 10 hours reviewing the AI output to make sure that it fits their QA. That's what happens, because again, there is no incentive for the efficiency in that perspective. And so we need to start thinking about a new pricing model. And I think whatever that new pricing model is has to be driven by market forces and be market tested. So if you aren't yet, you need to be part of a marketplace, because I think that power of leverage of like all the clients being part of this ecosystem, all of the firms being part of this ecosystem is also just as important. So we start really getting a good understanding of the relationship between value and cost.
And I would say, I'm just reading through these questions. I'm sorry we're not going to get to them all because there's a whole bunch of them here. But there was one question that jumped out at me, is like the phases in an AFA for litigation. What about discovery? Because discovery, is hourly because the scope's unknown. That's true, but don't just think about things in terms of hours. You got to think about it in terms of deliverables. So yes, you don't know how many depots it's going to cost you, how many depots you're going to have in a particular case, but you could price it on a fixed fee per deposition. And you can break that into apex depositions, 30B6 depositions, fact depositions, plaintiff depositions. If you know what you're going to pay per deposition, you can come up with, you have that sort of predictability. Same thing with interrogatories, experts, discovery motions. They can all be done on fixed fees on a per basis, per occurrence. So don't just think about it in terms of hours, but break it down into the deliverables, and then you actually will see that it can work.
All right, well, I think that does it for our time today. So we're gonna have to bring this to a close. Thanks so much, Maui and Ken. That was really fascinating, and I'm sure the audience got a lot out of it. Thanks for your time and insights.
Thank
you, everybody.
Thanks, Maui.
As stated during the beginning of this presentation, the link to initiate the certificate process will be displayed momentarily. My Law CLE would like to thank you for your participation in today's presentation.